Welcome to Tugat, Ezekiel.
Thanks, Declan.
I don't think any more introduction of you anymore. I think by now my viewers know you, so we can get cracking directly. And you're going to help us make sense of recent developments in Tigray and in Ethiopia. A lot of people have been texting me if you could make time to come on and help us make sense of that. I think a lot of people are confused about what is happening in Ethiopia and in Eritrea and possibility for war and all that. And you seem to be the one that they reach for when they want more understanding and nuance. So that is what we're going to try to do. And I thought we would start with what is happening in Tigray, namely in terms of possible revocation of the TPLF's license. Reports are that in 2 weeks' time, the TPLF might be outlawed. And what is happening there, if that is something that you have been following?
Yeah, I have been following events and processes in Tigray very closely to the extent that I can. There is a looming revocation of the recognition that was given to the TPLF, to the illegal party in Ethiopia. And the legal authority that confers that recognition is the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia. What happened is that when war erupted in Tigray, the Ethiopian parliament designated the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, as a terrorist organization that attacked the northern command, killed many of them. It's a claim. I'm not saying that this happened, but they claimed that because it declared war on Ethiopia, an existential war, as they said at the time, that the TPLF was deregistered and was declared a terrorist organization. After 2 years of war, as you know, the Pretoria Agreement ended the conflict in northern Ethiopia, the Tigray War, as I like to call it, the Tigray War. And in that agreement, both the Ethiopian government and the delegates that represented Tigray at that time. And I say this Tigray not to say the people, but because it was not clear who they represented, the TPLF or the government. They believed that they represented the Tigray government that was duly elected before the start of the war. But when they got there, the Ethiopian government did not want to recognize the TPLF as the legitimate government of Tigray. I guess it took some time, but then they agreed that the agreement was signed between the Ethiopian government, that the Pretoria Agreement was negotiated and signed by the TPLF and the Ethiopian federal government. So these were the two signatories of the Pretoria Agreement, or that the cessation of hostilities agreement signed in Pretoria. Now, I guess I'm not a lawyer, but I would understand that when the TPLF was a signatory, that simply indicated that it will become a legal entity. Whether the TPLF is registered or not, it is a signatory to an international agreement that ended the war or silenced the guns in Tigray. So that was the way it was. That they also negotiated the monitoring verification and other declarations in Nairobi. It was the TPLF, the name of the TPLF was attached to it, and in the provisions, it actually says that the TPLF will be delisted from the designation, would be removed, and it will become a legal entity. And it's written into the agreement. It is in the agreement that it says this, that when both sides recognized each other as a legal entity. Remember that the TPLF, or the Tigray government, declared that it does not recognize the Ethiopian government, which was unconstitutionally elected, according to the TPLF. Withdrew their recognition of each other as they went to war. Now they recognized each other, both. The TPLF recognized the Ethiopian government as a legitimate government, and the Ethiopian government recognized the TPLF as a legitimate legal entity. It's a legal entity. You can't sign an international and such a significant war a significant agreement that ended the bloodiest and deadliest war in the world of the 21st century. So it's really an important agreement, is it not? So you cannot sign it. You can't sign with an entity, a legal entity that does not exist. But 2 years after they got they got back, the TPLF was delisted. The designation was removed by Parliament. By Parliament that designated the TPLF as a terrorist organization, removed that designation. Second, because the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia had suggested that they do not have a mechanism or a legal authority to re-register or restore TPLF to its previous legal status, that a proclamation by Parliament was promulgated to enable the NEBE to register or restore. But what they did was they added something into it, something to that proclamation to enable the National Electoral Board, the Electoral Board, to restore. Now, it doesn't make sense, except that this is simply a technicality because the Ethiopian government already recognized the TPLF as a legal entity. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any legal sense for the Ethiopian government to sign such an important agreement with an illegal entity. It doesn't make any sense. The Ethiopian government has recognized it as a legal entity. But the board is saying that we cannot restore, but they added a provision in which you say the TPLF must now accept responsibility as the belligerent, as the agent that started the war. Well, where would that take? Wouldn't that simply endanger the Pretoria agreements now that TPLF is taking responsibility? Would that have any significance in the transitional justice? Is it going to have economic consequences because the TPLF actually used to own properties? So there were ramifications about that, and the TPLF simply refused to be registered as a new party. This is 2 years after the Pretoria was signed. Now, the Ethiopian government recognized the TPLF, but the board, the electoral board, which is ostensibly independent, does not recognize the TPLF. They demand that the TPLF be registered through a special consideration as a new entity, and the TPLF simply rejects it. So the idea of May the 7th comes from the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia saying that you have to meet, hold your Congress, General Assembly, and invite me to be present and witness the deliberations and decisions that you make. If you don't do that in 6 months, you will be deregistered. Let it be known that no other political party in Ethiopia, no other political party is required. No other. There are many who must meet. Even the PP did not hold its General Assembly before it became a legal entity. So I guess there is something that the Ethiopian government is doing here. It's not following a legal procedure or familiar legal processes. Something is amiss, something that the Ethiopian government is sabotaging. What would that do? I don't know, but the context of the 7th of May revocation, since the TPLF has not accepted the granting of that new certificate, I don't know if the board taking that away would mean anything legally. Anything goes in Ethiopia these days, legal or illegal.
Well, you mentioned the Ethiopian National Election Board, and when it threatens the TPLF that it would revoke its legal recognition, it is referring to the Ethiopian constitution. And one argument that the Ethiopian government seems to be running, although they don't make it explicit, is that the constitution takes precedence over the Pretoria Agreement, while the TPLF would say that the Pretoria Agreement is the one that is supreme as far as Tigray is concerned. So that seems to be the sticking point in terms of the back and forth between the two. So the TPLF said that, well, according to the Pretoria Agreement, we are the signatory, we are recognized, and therefore we shouldn't be required to go through the constitution process of Congress and all the procedures and all that a political party would normally be required. Whereas the Ethiopian government is saying that, well, if the Pretoria Agreement came into contradiction with the constitution, then the constitution should run supreme. Is that what is happening?
I don't think the Constitution says anything about registering or deregistering political parties. There is a law. It's not the Constitution, but the law, the electoral law that was passed in 2018 and then amended, I guess, in 2021 or 22. It's the law. If it's a Constitution, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So it trumps any other. If any law, any statute contradicts the Constitution, then the statute falls. So this is the electoral, there were two laws that they merged. One is the board, a law establishing the board, and there is another running the process, and they merged this into a big omnibus in 2018. So that is what actually stipulates the procedure and the process and the requirements for any political party to be a legal, to be recognized as a legal party. So if it were the Constitution, then the Ethiopian government is right, but this is not the Constitution, it's the law. What the TPLF is saying is that TPLF is an old political party. It was removed from the registrar of the electoral board because of the war, which the TPLF says is a war, a genocidal war declared on the people of Tigray, not what the Ethiopian government says that the TPLF actually started the war. So there is disagreement on who the culprit is in igniting the war itself. For the TPLF, it's the war declared on the Tigrayan people, and the TPLF simply, as a government of the people of Tigray, was acted in self-defense. So it's not really the Constitution, but even according to the electoral law, the bias should be in interpreting the law, the bias should be to ensure that peace prevails in the country, not on exacerbating tensions between political parties so that the letter of the law is observed. I'm not suggesting that the interpretation of the law favors the Ethiopian side or the Tigrayan side, but since a devastating war was fought, the law should be biased to make the TPLF a legal party because they have renounced violence. They want to engage in a struggle in the political realm, in the peaceful realm, and facilitating would be the call of duty for the board, not stymieing their ability to act. So the argument is, what is important? The technical issue of registering or not registering, or to make sure that the Pretoria Agreement and the provisions of the Pretoria Agreement are implemented. If the TPLF is the signatory, then there are more important issues that would be tackled in concert by the two signatories, including the restoration of Tigrayan lands to Tigray. This is not about the TPLF, it's about Tigray, and it's about the agreement. It's one of the issues that led to the war itself. Second, there are issues about the displacement of Tigrayans. Displaced people in Tigray in the millions. In the millions are in central Tigray, and those who live in the occupied lands of Tigray, the constitutional territories of Tigray, are living under threat and coercion. So their safety, their return to life is more important than any other thing. The reconstruction of Tigray and to make life better for the people of Tigray is more important about the technical issue of registering or not registering. Because if the signatory is not there, and I understand this, if one of the signatories is allowed on technical grounds to die, the Pretoria Agreement does not stand. I don't know what the calculation is on the Ethiopian side from a legal perspective. And there are other issues like the disarmament and demobilization and reintegration of the Tigray armed forces. There are important issues that the reintegration of Tigray to Ethiopia, to return of Tigray, the restoration of Tigray to the constitutional framework. Look, for now, the only thing that ties Tigray to Ethiopia is the Pretoria Agreement. There is no representation for Tigray in the Ethiopian parliament. Tigrayans are not a part of the national defense. The national defense don't work in the national government or in the federal government. Tigrayans in the rest of Ethiopia do not enjoy equal security and access to services as other Ethiopians. These are gargantuan issues. These are very important issues. Is the Ethiopian government, the signatory on that side, going to allow the electoral board to deregister TPLF and endanger all of the important things? So it's a matter of judgment call. For me, this is the registering of TPLF or not is a technical issue. And I understand why the Ethiopian government is insisting and actually saying that they have nothing to do with it. It's the board, and we don't interfere in the board. Oh yeah, we know that the Ethiopian government does not interfere in the board. The board is autonomous. Well, we know that is a joke, right? But the refusing to restore Tigray, to simply restore it, not register it as a new party, to restore has consequences. For instance, one fourth of the defunct EPRDF legally belongs to Tigray because the EPRDF was comprised of 4 parties. And when they divorced, it was clear that 1/4 belonged to the TPLF. Well, the Ethiopian government has confiscated that and used it for other reasons, and they don't want to return it. So there is that economic dimension. Second, the Ethiopian government, especially the Prosperity Party, does not want the TPLF to be in the political scene because they fear that the TPLF is one of the oldest and most organized parties that know how to govern and how to fight. So they're hell-bent on the government of Ethiopia is hell-bent on destroying the TPLF so that they can return to the Derg years or the Haile Selassie years where the center ruled the periphery. But the goal of the long struggle of Tigray is for self-government. That's what they want to stymie. Whether the Ethiopian government is going to be blinded by these expedient issues and then trample on the Tigrayans' right, making the TPLF registration a technical issue, the pretext for its action, we're going to have to see. But I hope that sane counsel prevails and they do what is right for Ethiopia and for Tigray, the Tigrayan people.
What? Yeah, I mean, no, it's from what I'm sitting. It's clear that both parties are playing brinkmanship, as you explained. The Ethiopian regime is using technicalities to kill off the TPLF and to kill off the second signatory to the Pretoria Agreement. And the TPLF is very, very defiant. Actually, they issued a statement today saying that their status would be restored and that they don't have any doubt, and that if as far as they were concerned, in the unlikely event that their status was revoked or the status was not restored, there will be serious problems. So there is an eerie similarity to what was happening in prior to the war, and it's not beyond the realm of possibility that the status of the TPLF might be revoked in a week's time now, 7th of May, you said. Why is it that the observers and facilitators of the Pretoria Agreement don't seem to be alarmed by this development, and they don't seem to be making efforts to prevent this eventuality?
Well, here is the issue that most people should understand. The Pretoria Agreement was signed, I think, November the 2nd, 2022, right? When did the electoral board begin this issue of registering the TPLF? It was in August 2024. For 2 years, without being registered, the TPLF was participating in governing Tigray. It was negotiating with the federal government. For 2 years, it was functioning. It was functioning without the issue of being registered, right? Why can't they return to the status quo ante? That was operational for 2 years. Is what the Electoral Commission saying is going to throw into the pit whatever agreement and the future of Tigray, the Pretoria Agreement? Is the Pretoria Agreement going to be important? Now, why would it be? This is my question about logic. Why would it be impossible for the TPLF to continue to do what they had done for 2 years before the intervention of the Electoral Board? They were able to function. They were able to function, albeit circumscribed by their own internal problems. They were able to function, work with the federal government, meet international observers, meet ambassadors, deal with the media and all kinds of things, administer the unoccupied areas of Tigray without any recognition from the Electoral Board. It took 2 years for the Electoral Board to write that letter or issue that certificate. So, if anything, if you ask me, what would happen by deregistering the TPLF on the 7th of May is to return to the situation before August 2024. I don't know what the Ethiopian government is going to do if we are strictly talking about legal processes and legal requirements. Then that will be the reality, and I think it will be a non-event as far as I'm concerned. It's a technical issue. Second, let me remind a lot of people about blaming someone as the belligerent, as the cause for a war. At the end of World War II, France, that was devastated by the Germans' war, demanded, even though the Americans were not in favor of it and the British were reluctant, they demanded that Germany be held responsible for starting the war. Germany lost the war. And this issue was dictated to Germany, saying that Germany started the war, and because of that, Germany must pay restitution to France and other allied powers. What was the result of holding Germany responsible for the start of the war? Immediately, the theory of backstabbing, that Germany did not lose the war, but Germany was stabbed in the back by Jews and others. It took only 19 years. It took only 19 years for a more devastating war to start. About 19 years, maybe about 20 years, but the war actually started, Second World War started when the League of Nations was unable to act when Japan attacked Manchuria in 1931, when Italy attacked Ethiopia in 1936, and when Germany attacked Sudetenland in 1939, 38. And of course, the war in earnest started when Germany attacked Poland on September the 1st, 1939. So the point is that the issue of registering TPLF or not should not be a big issue for both sides, especially for the Ethiopian government. What did the Ethiopian government get out of the war in Tigray? What did it get out of Tigray? Did it consolidate its position? It went right into another war in the Amhara region. The economic impact is unbelievable. The diplomatic loss, the loss of the military. The Ethiopian government has not recovered from that war, the devastating war in Tigray. Do they really want to go back? Do they really want to fight out another war in Tigray? I know the Prime Minister had said that if you don't register, you're not going to be participating in any election, and then we're going to go back to war. Really? You really want to go back to war in Tigray and fight again in the north simply because TPLF was not registered or registered? Really, there will be the pretext to go to war? I think this is important to understand. And thirdly, what is the TPLF supposed to do at this point in time? Accept responsibility for starting the war, that this was not a war that started 2 years before. That decision was made by the Ethiopian government 2 years before November 2020, that it had amassed all of Ethiopia's military arsenal around Tigray, had been shuttling between Asmara and Addis Ababa and Bahir Dar to fight Tigray. This was a done deal. What is the TPLF supposed to do right now? Accept responsibility for that? Maybe they have to take some responsibility to the people of Tigray for not preparing sufficiently. They could probably. That is a moral issue that the TPLF must take vis-a-vis the people of Tigray. But to accept the dictates of the Prosperity Party and say, we started the war is, I think, as devastating as anything else to not just TPLF, but to the people of Tigray. And secondly, keep in mind, like I was saying earlier, there is an economic dimension. The Ethiopian government is a rapacious government. They have taken away properties with the TPLF, and they don't want to return that. And for that, they use the law and the National Election Board to keep the money that they stole. What is TPLF supposed to do in this situation? What is that supposed to do? But the most important thing is, do you really want to go to war? If the Ethiopian government wants to go to war, the pretext of TPLF not registering is not going to be the pretext. It will be some other reasons that the Ethiopian government wants to go to war against Tigray. It will not be because of the TPLF, because this is an easy issue, because what is most important is not whether the TPLF as a political party is registered or not. What is important is the implementation, the genuine implementation of the Pretoria Agreement. Why is the Ethiopian government restoring Tigray to the constitutional territories? Why is that not important? Why is the demobilization of TPLF combatants and their reintegration not important? Why is the return of Tigray to the constitutional fold not important? Is the Ethiopian government going to give away all of this because TPLF is not registered? I think even Tigrayans should understand this with a broader view of what is really going on. I don't blame the TPLF for this, but they have moral responsibility to the people of Tigray for other reasons, not for starting the war.
Well, you say that the TPLF's internal problems haven't helped the TPLF itself and Tigray's cause as well. And one manifestation of that implosion is the manner with which Getachew was removed from Tigray. Now, this is a very sensitive and tricky subject in Tigray, not least because there are many versions of what happened. Getachew and his people say that the Debrecen faction of the TPLF, committed a coup against them, and that's why they were defenestrated. That is what Getachew people and Getachew himself would say. Actually, he was very open about that it was a coup. And the Debrecen faction of the TPLF would say that Getachew was engaged in some sort of treachery, and therefore that it was time he was removed. And sometimes they would say, well, the reason he was removed was because his term, which was 2 years, according to the agreement, had ended anyway. Other people say a lot of other things by way of explaining what happened. In you reading what happened there?
Yeah, I guess politics is about playing games. It's a dirty game. It's a game, and dirty one at that. So I don't know what the rumors are. I don't know what the details are. I can only deal with the information in the public realm. That the first one is that the term ended. The term of the entering government ended, and that's what the Ethiopian government said. That's what the Ethiopian Prime Minister said. That's what Getachew said, and what everybody said. That the term ended, and the Parliament extended the term by 1 year. So that is what is in the public realm. And from what I heard from the TPLF, from the Ethiopian Prime Minister, is that they will make some changes. They will make some changes in leadership. The other thing that is in the public realm is that the TPLF had said that because Getachew and other members of the Tigray interim government, the Tyra, they were growing closer to the Ethiopian government, and they were doing things that are unbecoming of their responsibility. That I have heard, but there is no way for me to verify. But what is in the public realm is that TPLF is saying that because Getachew is no longer a member of the TPLF, that he cannot represent. That's what in the public realm, that he cannot represent the TPLF in the Tigray government. So who's closer to the Ethiopian government? I don't know. There are accusations flying from either side, hurling accusations against each other. One is saying you are too close to Ethiopia, the other is saying you're too close to Eritrea. But that's not the kind of thing that I have the privilege of getting to the bottom of it, so I don't know. But what is important is not what happened in the past. What is important is whether Getachew is wronged or Debretsion is wronged. What is important is something that I wrote for some, and I'm giving you my own personal view on this one. What is important is what I wrote in 2002, and I've sent this to Getachew as a person as well. What is needed is transformation of the political system in Tigray. That includes the transformation of the TPLF itself. That the way they had operated in the past might not be useful today because there is a new generation of Tigrayans who do not share the same experience of fighting as guerrillas and becoming a government and governing from the center, understanding how the government operated. The new generation in Tigray have no knowledge or experience of what it means to be a guerrilla organization fighting in the mountains of Tigray and then becoming a government and govern. TPLF must revamp itself, reshape itself, reconsider itself to become useful and to become useful to politics, the current politics in Tigray, and to be responsive to the demands of the generation. That's the transformation that is needed for TPLF itself. But not only for TPLF, but also for the other parties, that the democratic space become transformed so that there is a real exchange of ideas for Tigray. And that is the second thing is the transition to a more participatory politics rather than the dominant party politics of the EPRDF era. I think that is still important. If these are still important in Tigray, that the internal politics is transformed, and that leads to the transition of Tigray, not the parties, by the way, Tigray politics into a new political dispensation, these are necessary. So the TPLF should bring itself up to date, forget about the dominant party doctrine. It's not good for Tigray. Probably had worked for some time in the past, but right now Tigray needs a competitive politics, fair competition. So consider yourself one party. Forget about the dominant party. This is not going to be done overnight. It takes some time. So how Getachew was removed, I don't think that the people of Tigray, the youth of Tigray, should get stuck on that. Because whether it was one side pushing the other, conniving with other, it doesn't really matter. What matters is to take matters into your own hands and hold others accountable in what they are going to do in the future. The future of Tigray, the future of the youth of Tigray is more important than the arcane politics of the past. I think Tigray survived genocide. The people of Tigray survived a genocide. And one of the reasons that they survived is because of their unity as Tigrayans. The protection of that is more important. If some from the Debretsion side are calling Getachew and company as Banda, that's inappropriate. They are equally Tigrayans. If the other side is also calling the Debretsion side as stooges of Eritrea, that's not right either. You're all Tigrayans. You're all struggling for Tigray. So unity, consensus, cooperation is more important than struggle over the wrongs that were done in the past.
Well, again, I understand your sentiment that what happened in Tigray doesn't much matter. What matters is what Tigray and Tigrayans do from now on. But there is one sense in which what happened or how we understand what happened really, really matters. And that is that there is a significant section of Tigrayan society today that believes that it has been hard done by the TPLF, because that section of society believes that Getachew was trying to introduce reform or transformation, how you put it. Maybe he heeded to your advice, maybe to your credit. And they say that the TPLF didn't want that transformation because it was getting in their way. Because for the TPLF to survive, again, according to the telling of this section of society, the TPLF must control the state apparatus, the economic apparatus, and the political apparatus for it to survive. By its nature, the TPLF is exploitative, and the only way it could remain as a party in the 21st century is if it is the governing party. And that is the reason why the TPLF, again, they would say, was completely against any transformation or reform. So there is a sense of wound and grievance that comes from that. And it is in that sense that this discussion is very important in Tigrayan circles.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've suggested a couple of things to the TPLF as well, that they need to transform themselves. And this is not going to be done overnight. I've also said that there are things within the framework of the Tigray public that the TPLF may have to confess and ask for forgiveness. These are the moral issues that they have to do within Tigray. The kind of thing that you're just telling me is just going to make Tigray vulnerable to outside manipulators. That's all it does. TPLF had done some wrong in Ethiopia and in Tigray as well. They have. There's no doubt about that. But TPLF is also an experienced political party that had done a lot of good things for Tigray, that defended Tigray. It's a well-organized party as well. Now, it's not going to be a political party forever. Well, the Democratic Party in this country was the party of slaveholders that waged a civil war in the United States, but still exists. It's transformed. It's changed. What is important for Tigrayans? Maintaining their unity or fighting on politics, on political priorities? What is more important? To me, opening the Tigrayan body politic to outsiders, especially the Ethiopian leadership right now that is really known for their manipulation. That's not going to be good for Tigray. Now, the kind of thing that you're just saying could be put away for a while, for some time. If anything, the timing is not right. I'm not saying don't settle scores, don't hold TPLF accountable. There are things for which it should be held accountable within Tigray. But the unity of the Tigrayan political community and the Tigrayan public is more important because there is a danger lurking out there that had demonstrated to the people of Tigray that life is cheap, that has demonstrated that it's willing to go to great length to humiliate, to dehumanize, to degrade, and to destroy. That force is still out there. That force is still out there. And it is threatening to restart it. So that is what I'm saying, that when that danger is out there, just like I can cite so many examples where the Kuomintang and the Communist Party of China, when there was a Japanese threat, they came together. And even the Second World War, the Soviet Union and the United States and the Western powers, they came together against this evil called fascism. That happens, and that's the only thing that I am saying, that the timing, and what is more important than others is important to consider. But this could also all be sorted out and settled some other time.
Well, I think just to add one more point. I'm trying to restrain from giving my opinion because I'm trying to play even-handed here. But one sense you get from speaking to Tigrayans generally is that the TPLF has a warped sense of priorities. They say that, the real urgent priority should have been the restoration of the occupied land and the rehabilitation of the people in IDP centers. But that in fact, the TPLF has never cared about these matters. They have only cared about their own status. And there is that sense among Tigrayans. But anyway, one final point in terms of Tigray, Ezekiel. The people who were in the interim administration, the Getachew interim administration, seem to have concluded that the only way to bring about reform in Tigray is by forming a new political party. I think you'll have heard talks of new political party, and actually they have gone as far as to say that it will be a liberal party. I don't know what that means in the context of Tigray. I don't know how much you want to say on this, but there are talks that Getachew is sort of entertaining the idea of forming a new political party in Tigray?
Yeah, I mean, on the first issue that you raised about, I don't get to motives. Why did TPLF do this? Why did the TPLF want to remain in power? The TPLF wants to do. These are issues of motives. These are motives why they are doing what. But I have said that one thing: the dominant party idea doesn't work. It doesn't work for Tigray, and TPLF must take that into account and become just one of the other parties competing in the current politics, not the politics of the past. That I have said. But against the backdrop of this threat, the people of Tigray and political parties in Tigray should be aware, is what I'm saying at this point in time. But in that context, the question of a new party by Getachew and people that are with him should be a welcome news. Number one, there will be no squabbling within the TPLF. There will be no pointing fingers within the TPLF. That's what happens in political parties, by the way. If you don't agree with the goals and objectives and the programs and ideologies of your political party, you form another party. There are, of course, three options in an organization: exit, voice, or protest, or exit, voice, or loyalty. If you don't agree, you can exit. If the voice that you made within the party didn't work, you just move to the exit, and that's good for Tigray. The expansion of the political realm, the increasing numbers of players in Tigray is only good for Tigray, and the TPLF leaders must accept this as a positive step, for the transition into a more participatory politics in Tigray. For their credit in Tigray, they did not kill each other. They shook hands even as they were fighting. That's a positive thing, and continue to build that culture. Other TPLF leaders should welcome that the Getachew and people who have the same goals, political goals and programs, formed a new party. Now, I hope that this is for the people of Tigray, and I don't want to go into motives, but I don't forget the fact that the person that sits at the helm of power in Addis Ababa is a dangerous man. He could probably use one or the other party against the others, but be aware of that. Maintain the unity of Tigray. But within the framework of the Tigray political community, it should be welcomed as good news.
I think the sense among Tigrayans is that neither the TPLF nor the putative new party by Getachew Reda will have the wisdom and judiciousness to find it within themselves to not be used or exploited by Abiy in the manner that you just described. So there is always that fear among Tigrayans. But I think that is it with in terms of Tigray. If we could broaden our topic to Ethiopia, one issue that has reached fever level pitch is the issue of liberalization and privatization in Ethiopia. I mean, I think there was a new draft proclamation last week that would, if passed, and it will pass, of course, in Ethiopia, there is no problem, that would allow foreign nationals to own land in Ethiopia. Is this a new thing, and what is its significance?
Yeah, of course, it's new. Definitely, it's new. Land is the property of the Ethiopian people since the land nationalization proclamation of 1975. This was enshrined in the Ethiopian constitution. Ethiopians are not allowed. Ethiopians themselves are not allowed to own land. They can lease, but they don't own land because land is the collective property of the Ethiopian people, not the government. Let's keep it. That's just the Ethiopian people. That's the way it is. People could debate the importance of it from an economic perspective, that investors will be attracted and invest in Ethiopia if they have a legal guarantee to property rights. That's a matter of experience. If the constitution doesn't allow, because of the history of land ownership in Ethiopia, it doesn't allow. It You know what they call this kind of thing? It's called extraterritoriality, where colonial masters around the world have the extraterritorial rights. They're taxed less. They're not held to account if they commit a crime in local courts, that they would be tried by European or the colonial powers courts. The idea that there is a privilege for foreigners, the privilege of owning property for foreigners and not Ethiopians, it's befuddling to me. Not just the unconstitutionality of the issue, but the fact that for expediency, for reasons of expediency, that outsiders would be treated better than Ethiopians themselves. This is what it is, that they're saying that they attract investment if there is the legal protection of property rights. But outsiders, if that is the way, if that's what the Ethiopian government wants to do, try to change the constitution first. Try to change the constitution first. I don't think that it is possible to do that, even in today's Ethiopia. But the back door where the Council of Ministers is proposing a law that contradicts the constitution of Ethiopia, that contradicts the struggle for which millions had died in Ethiopia. It's bewildering. It's bewildering that they do this, but it's connected. It's not what the Ethiopian parliament is going to do. The Ethiopian parliament is a rubber stump. They will do anything. They will do anything. They will pass a law that is unconstitutional. But this is done by the prime minister, who has his own connections with outsiders, and he has been preparing the ground by demolishing buildings in Addis Ababa so that investors from the UAE could come and invest and own the land. That's basically what it is. In return, he will get some capital from the UAE, weapons from the UAE, supporting that area. So basically, the Ethiopian government is a Manchurian government, a proxy government for Abu Dhabi, that is doing the bidding of Abu Dhabi in starting war in Tigray, in preparing to start war in Eritrea, in collective, I don't know what they call it, the collectivization of agriculture in southeast Ethiopia, displacement of people in cities in the name of corridor development, whatever that is. If it is development, it has to be development. Why the corridor alone is developed, I don't understand. But these are all the doings of Abu Dhabi. They have all the hallmarks of Abu Dhabi, including we haven't talked about this in the context of Tigray, but the gold mining business in Ethiopia, which includes the Tigray, they're all part of the UAE program of becoming a dominant middle power in the Arabian Gulf and the Red Sea Basin in the Horn of Africa.
Is the UAE the only player in this respect, or other players who are pushing the Ethiopian government to privatize and allow them to own property?
Yeah. When you speak, you're get back to the middle get back to the middle, because only half of your face is seen to me.
Oh, all right. But did you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't. Yeah, now I can hear. Yeah, okay. Who else is encouraging the Ethiopians to privatize property rights or land ownership in particular? Well, the United States government had been doing this since the EPRDF days. The Western institutions, the multilateral institutions, and Western governments had been pressuring the Ethiopian government to privatize everything, not just the land, but telecommunications, the Ethiopian Airlines, banks, and everything else, to privatize everything. Under Prime Minister Meles and Haile Mariam, they resisted. We're not there yet as for Ethiopia in all of these fronts. The financial institutions, the technology institutions were not privatized. This government had privatized telecommunications, had privatized or showed willingness to privatize the Ethiopian Airlines, had privatized the banks recently. And this is the last straw. The land is one that was a holdout. Western governments had been doing this, and the Ethiopians have kowtowed to these demands incrementally. Incrementally, the West had been getting their way, but this one is the last one. And of course, this time it is only the UAE that are going to invest in cities, particularly Addis Ababa, where they're going to build real estate, as they have in, well, maybe the Chinese as well, as they have in some African countries. They're going to build apartments. The Ethiopian Prime Minister had been saying that I've been cleaning up. Oh, of course you've been cleaning up, because there were ready investors. Otherwise, where did all of this money come from for Ethiopia to build not new highways, but simply expanding existing highways and painting new buildings? Where did all of this money come from? We know that the Ethiopian government is in terrible economic shape, unable to service its own debt until last year. But yeah, the fact that they had mortgaged the Ethiopian economy to the IMF and the World Bank, it stands as an example of Ethiopia losing its sovereignty in economic matters. And the land issue is one of the latest in a series of steps that were taken to privatize property ownership in Ethiopia. And the point that I was making is that land belongs to the Ethiopian people, but now the Ethiopian people cannot own land. Foreigners will be allowed to own land, and that is an emblem of the loss of sovereignty on your territory. That's basically what it is.
So if you were, if we were to be charitable to the Ethiopian regime, I know that the Ethiopian regime is trying to use this as a scheme to buy weapons and all that, and maybe will come to possible war with Eritrea towards the end. But is there a charitable interpretation? Is it just possible that this could actually lead to something positive in Ethiopia? Do we have a case of a country that has privatized its coveted assets and something positive came out of that?
No, I don't. I don't. There is no correlation. In theory, or in studies, there is no correlation between privatization and economic growth. Ethiopia had grown by leaps and bounds for 14, 15 years since under the TPLF program of developmental states. The criticism that we had of the developmental state is that it suppressed political and human rights. It's not the lack of economic engine. Other countries that have grown over an extended period of time, for 15, almost 30 years, did not necessarily privatize everything. So I don't. It's not necessary. And in Ethiopia, land ownership has historical roots, which produced a society of haves and have-nots in the past. And this have-nots and haves and have-nots is not just a class issue. It's not a class issue. It is also a national question. Land is connected with the issue of the nationalities, the question of the nationalities in Ethiopia. So there is a unique context. Simply taking a page out of another country doesn't mean that you're going to experience economic boom. You might. But if at the end of the day, after in aggregate you have demonstrated that you have grown, but you have created a society of haves and have-nots, tremendous inequality, as it does in some of these Western countries, which leads to social breakdown and turmoil and protest, that's not what we will need. Ethiopia has its own unique history when it comes to ownership. Its unique character, its unique feature. Simply taking a page out of the IMF is not going to lead to equitable, inclusive growth. What Ethiopia needs is to use economic growth to solve political problems, not to create more political problems. So I don't see that, number one, disregarding the Constitution is a good thing. The Constitution is out there to limit you from doing what you think is right. It limits you. It limits governments, and governments should know limits. Power should know limits, otherwise power, absolute power, corrupts absolutely. So no, I don't have any favorable opinion of whatever the prosperity government is doing, all of whatever they're doing, including, by the way, including cleaning up Addis Ababa for its elites and recruiting young men and women as young as 10 and 12 and 14 to fight wars is a good thing. You could have a clean city in Addis Ababa, but if the human cost is exorbitant, prohibitive, I don't think that's development. I think development should be human development, not just physical development.
Well, we'll come back to the forced conscription that you just mentioned, maybe in connection with the possible war with Eritrea. But just on the land issue, because it strikes me as something very significant, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot here. Can a nation in Ethiopia, like Tigray, for instance, say no to whatever legislation that the Ethiopian parliament passes, to put it generously, but rubber stamps? I think that would be the more correct way of putting it. I know that vaguely, I know that the states like Oromia and Tigray and Amhara and the others are supposed to be autonomous, but I don't quite know whether that means that they could say no to privatization.
Well, now, in general, as a conceptual matter, the regional states are autonomous states, which actually created self-rule for themselves and then joint rule of the federal government. On the question of land ownership is the owners are the Ethiopian people according to the Ethiopian constitution. But the administration of land, because you still have to lease it and all that, the administration of land now belongs to the regional governments. In theory, or conceptually, yes, they can refuse. It's not up to the Ethiopian government to legislate what the regional governments do. But the constitution is not operational in Ethiopia. The constitution had been violated on many levels, many levels, and nothing happened. Appointing regional government officials without even their knowledge. There are a number of examples that I can cite where a federal government overreach its bounds. This is not the last one. And as I said, that yes, the regional governments were supposed to be the ones that should that administer land, but even under the EPRDF, the regional governments had given up on some of their rights, arrogating them to the federal government under the name of investment. I remember what was being said at that time, that land to the tiller had become land to the investor. So the Investment Corporation of Ethiopia had been instructing, and now, by the way, they're not really doing it, they're instructing the regional governments to administer the land, meaning allocate them to the investment priorities of the federal government. So the erosion of those rights actually started under the EPRDF, but the EPRDF was mindful of not flagrantly violating the constitution. They instruct the regional governments by giving them instructions, directives to do what they must do. So they didn't blatantly and flagrantly violate the law under the EPRDF, but the issue of investment, see, for a period of time, you can lease that land, but that land is land that was not used by people like in the Gambela region and other places. The PLF were mindful of that. But this idea of owning land in general as a matter of principle, and I think principally they're going to own land in Addis Ababa in some of the cities, that is against the constitution.
Well, our final point, Ezekiel, forced conscription. I have been reading a lot of reports actually of young people in Addis Ababa and in various parts of Oromia being rounded up. Actually, some of the stories are horrifying. Young people who could actually get a pass up if they could pay an extortionate amount of money. Otherwise, you're doomed and all that. And you get the sense that the regime is preparing for something big in terms of war. And last year, the fear that Ethiopia might go into war with Somalia Now, that seems to have subsided because there is some sort of normalization in terms of relations with Ethiopia and Somalia. But there are fears that there might be war with Eritrea in connection with the access to the Red Sea. What do you make of what is happening in terms of the conscription and your reading of that in relation to war?
There has been conscription going on in Oromia even before this current round. They let it up for some time, but they returned with gusto, recruiting young people. And it's happening almost all over Oromia. Eastern Hararge, Western Hararge, Western Arsi, Eastern Shawa, North Shawa. These are the zones in Oromia. West Shawa, West Wallaga, East Wallaga, Kellam Wallaga, Horogoro Wallaga, Ilobabur, Jimma, and Borana and Guji. Young people are being rounded up in cities and in schools and in the streets. The militia. See, there are several layers of security forces in Oromia itself. There is the Oromia Police, the Oromia Special Forces, the Oromia Militia, the Oromia Gachanesirna, and the Oromia Korenagenya, and other private paramilitary groups sponsored by the government. So they have this layers of security forces in Oromia that could execute the diktats of the Ethiopian government. And that's also where you could see the violation of the separation of powers between the federal and the regional governments. So in all of these places, young people are rounded up. It's been going on. It was just the tempo has increased these past weeks. I don't know what the goal is, but because some refused to join, I know that some were killed in some places. They were shot and killed because that is a message to others that if you resist, you will lose your life. So what the young people are going right now is, by the way, they're young. According to the Ethiopian constitution, if you're younger than 18, you shouldn't be recruited, even voluntarily or.
I have read reports of 14-year-olds being rounded up. So you're right on that one.
10, and there was one that I read about 7 as well. The 14, the 15, the 16 were actually trained, and they were captured by Amhara forces and Oromo forces. These were captured, and they were giving interviews from Wallaga, from Shawa, and from Amhara region. These were actually young people. The ones that you just about 14 and 16 were young people who completed their training in Awash Arba or other military training grounds, were actually fighting, were sent to the front lines to fight, and they were captured. And some of them were saying, I listened to some of them carefully, they were saying that they didn't want to fight, so they voluntarily just crossed over to the enemy line and gave up. So that's been going on. That's what's going on. This new round is probably in preparation for the Eritrean war, for more war in Oromia and more war in Amhara region. I don't know. I'm not sure the Eritrean venture is about Assab. I think most Ethiopians think that Ethiopia actually needs Assab as a port and willing to pay in lives and treasure to recapture Assab. No, this is simply whipping passion. What they're saying embedded in that argument is saying that it is an agreement of two anti-Ethiopian rebel forces that denied Ethiopia access to the sea. That was the wrong narrative. We're going to right that wrong narrative by taking over Assab. So it's not about Assab. It's about war against TPLF and EPLF, who they say connived to deny Ethiopia access to the sea. Natural harbor that Ethiopia had were taken away because of the conspiracy of these forces. So this is about whipping passions to continue that war. Why do I say this? In the last 30 years, the Ethiopian connection to the world economy had shifted from Assab to Djibouti, to some extent Berbera, and to another extent Lamu, the Lamu ports in Kenya. They're building like 6 lanes highway connecting Lamu to Isiolo in Kenya, and from Isiolo to Addis Ababa, and the other one going to why would Ethiopia need another port? Why would Ethiopia need another port when its whole orientation had changed? And why would Ethiopia need to see if Ethiopia takes Assab by force, or any other way, by the way, even by peaceful, legal, international means, which does not exist, even if they acquire that, it requires about $50 billion of investment to bring the port up to standard and to build a road connecting Assab to Ethiopia. Where would Ethiopia get $50 billion to invest on Assab? The budget of the federal government in Ethiopia is about $14 billion. So Ethiopia is going to spend its budget of 4 years on rebuilding. It's not about Assab. It's not about Assab. People don't pay attention to what's going on. And I could say more about Djibouti, but I don't want to take more time about it. But it's not about Assab. It's about, as the Ethiopian government says and its spokespersons repeat, as the Prime Minister says, that there is brokenness, the brokenness that was meted out on Ethiopia, what is that? Sabrat, the brokenness, Ethiopia's brokenness. He is a Messiah that is going to deliver Ethiopia from its brokenness, inflicted on Ethiopia by these two forces that have always fought against Ethiopia's greatness. That's the narrative. It's all about narrative. It's not about reality. Are they going to go to war for this with Eritrea? Now, I don't underestimate the power or the capacity of the Ethiopian leader to do egregious acts if it seems that it's going to prolong his stint in power. But if you're a sane person calculating for the future of Ethiopia, I don't think it makes any sense to fight for it or even acquire it through peaceful means. I'm sure that some Ethiopians are going to tell me that, oh, you're not patriotic enough. No, I am patriotic. That's why I'm telling you that you don't need it. You don't need it because we don't have the money. It's because we have already made a strategic decision 30 years ago, a strategic decision for Ethiopia 30 years ago, and I've traveled so long to be able to go back to what we left off. I think what Meles Zenawi said is that we will leave it for the future. But if the Eritrean government wants Assab for itself, it could make it where the camels go to pee or something like that. He said that. So the strategic decision was made, and that strategic decision was working. So this is about propaganda to whip up passion for a war that would only serve the powers that be in Arat Kilo.
Well, I don't know how much in detail you want to go in this respect, but let's get two things that people say when it comes to the quest for Assab. One is in terms of Abiy, it's his vanity project, because he knows that if he were to somehow secure Assab, he would go down in history, and that is driven by that personal ambition, because Abiy is that sort of person. That's one thing people say. The other thing that people say is connected to the historical injustice that you just mentioned. People say, or the Sabrat. They say that it was an act of injustice that Eritrea ended up with both ports, Assab and Massawa, and Ethiopia empty-handed, and now it's a country of 120 million people, and landlocked country of 120 million people in that region is unsustainable, and therefore that it's about time Ethiopians solved that significant problem. That is what you hear people say. Again, I'm trying to be I'm trying to steelman the best case for why people think it's a worthwhile adventure. So I don't know if you want to sort of counter any of that.
Sure. Look, it's not a conspiracy. The reason that, let me put this way. In the last 500 years, Ethiopia had access to international waters only for 40 years. When Eritrea was joined to Ethiopia in a federation. That's when Ethiopia gained access. Of course, Ethiopia always aspired to have access. But it was the Turks, the Ottoman Turks that had it. It was the Italians that had it. But Ethiopia did not have access to. But the fact that Ethiopia, since medieval times, that Ethiopian leaders wanted access to the sea is not to be denied, but it's only in the last 40 years that, in the 40 years between 1950 and 1990 that Ethiopia had Assab and Assawa as its own sovereign port. So Eritrea joined Ethiopia in a federation, and Ethiopia gained access to the sea. Eritrea won the war. Eritrea won the war, obliterated the Ethiopian army in Eritrea, and chose independence in a legal way. Held a referendum, and it became a member of the United Nations. And Eritrea is another country right now. You can wail about it. You can decry it, you can talk about it, you can whine about it. It doesn't matter. Eritrea is a sovereign country. Eritrea is a sovereign country. If Ethiopians did not know this, let me make that clear, that Eritrea is a sovereign country. How are you going to get it? How are you going to take Assad away? By accusing...
In terms of the sovereignty of Ethiopia, actually of Eritrea, an interesting development, and I'm sure this was done with connivance and permission of Abiy Ahmed. The Amhara National Party, I don't know the official name of the party, issued a statement last week saying that they don't recognize the sovereignty of Eritrea.
I heard it. It's not the Amhara Party, to be honest. It's not Abiy. It's not the Abiy is the name in Amharic.
I think it's called the Amhara National Movement Party or something.
Yes, yeah. There is a part of the Amhara, the national movement. It's called the Abiy is the Amhara Beherai Nikanaki or the Amhara movement. There is a section of it that is part of the government, led by the Minister of Science and Technology, who was a member, but is part of the government right now. It is that faction that put out a press release saying that we don't recognize Eritrea as an independent state. Does it really matter? Does it really matter? I mean, it's a party, I know, but do you think that even the Ethiopian government has a basis of international law to revoke its recognition? Once given to Eritrea, you can discontinue diplomatic relations. Forget about the Amhara Party or the faction of the Amhara Party that put out this press release. It's not even worth discussing. Even the Ethiopian government that recognized Eritrea, I've not heard of anything in international law that you could revoke the recognition that you granted to another country. You could cut off diplomatic relations with another country. You could do that. You could recall your ambassador. But you can't take away that recognition. Okay, that's what I don't know if that's possible, but from the basis of what I know, that once you recognize a country and that country becomes a member of the United Nations, it will remain the member. You can't take it away. So the Amhara National Party could say all kinds of things for internal consumption. It has no effect in an international arena, or of any legal foundation for the party to say this. And keep in mind that this is only the faction that is associated with the government, but there is another faction that is also in parliament that laughed it off, a part of that party itself. So what I'm saying is that this cannot be taken away. Eritrea is an independent country. Whether it was done the right way or the wrong way is a matter of interpretation, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is Eritrea is an independent nation and a country, a member of the United Nations. Ethiopia can have access to Assad only through negotiated settlement with the Eritrean government. If you take it by force, that will be an aggression. If that's what Ethiopia wants to do, it's up to them. But my view is that it's not even necessary. It's not even necessary because it's going to cost you about $50 billion to bring Assad up and running, not in any time soon. Now, secondly, the Ethiopian government, the Prime Minister says that we are 120 million people and we are suffocated, and we will not be suffocated to the end of days. What gives you the right, whether you are 120 million people or 120 billion people, what gives you the right is not that you have a big population. It's the economic volume that you generate that needs support. It's economic volume Now, he could say this, the Ethiopian government, the Ethiopian Prime Minister could say that by 2050, Ethiopia would be one of the superpowers in the world. He could say this to the end of days. And he says that. That doesn't, the fact that you could potentially become one of the superpowers doesn't make it legal. Doesn't give you a legal foundation to take over another territory. So they can say that, but the fact that you're 120 million does not entitle you to a port. It doesn't. The only way that this could work is to work with Djibouti. Look, didn't Djibouti offer Ethiopia a port, Obok, or the other? For they say you can have ours because the Djibouti, the 90% of the goods that go in and out of Djibouti goes to Ethiopia and comes out of Ethiopia. Djibouti is not going to use all of the capacity of the Djibouti port. They don't want to lose that. They don't want that volume to be diverted to Assad. They're the losing party in this case. And they have offered Ethiopia, said, here it is. Why don't they take that? They called the bluff. The Djiboutians, they called the bluff, saying, you want the harbor? Here it is. Come on, take it. If Ethiopia is interested in access, a sovereign port, Djibouti gave you. You don't need anything. Like I said, this is not about 120 million people suffocated. This is simply to make sure that chaos reigns in Ethiopia, and that gives a breathing space for this unpopular government who's remained in power so far only by pitting one political force against the other. And this is another bone of contention, that the Ethiopians simply raise it for nationalistic purposes, but I don't think it's going to bear any fruit in fact.
Well, I suppose what Abiy would say in response to that is that what Ethiopia needs is not just the access to a port, but ownership of a coastline, so that it could have naval base and all that sort of thing. That's what they would say.
And that's what I meant when I say a sovereign port. Okay, there is a sovereign port. That means Ethiopia needs its own port. And there is access to the sea, just like Djibouti, Berbera, or Lamu.
Yeah, and they are distinct, yeah.
Yeah, and the military base. Why? Okay, if Ethiopia needs a sovereign port, Djibouti gave them the opportunity to have a sovereign port. If Ethiopia wants a sovereign port, they had the possibility of growing their share in Berbera from 19% to 50% they have, so that they could have a controlling authority. That's another option, right? Why does Ethiopia need a navy? Are we going to believe that Ethiopia has an interest, economic and national, vital interest in the Pacific Ocean that it's going to protect by sea power, by naval power? Ethiopia's navy is 300, the personnel is 300 people. That, you can put it in Lukhaya or in Assab, 300 people. It cannot even protect itself, much less protecting Ethiopia's national interest. Ethiopia doesn't have a national interest along the littoral, much less elsewhere. This is the propaganda of Abiy Ahmed, who believes that in 50 years, Ethiopia is going to be the second superpower. Next to who? How about Turkey? How about India? How about China? How about the US? How about the European countries? What are they going to? They wither away? Are we going to believe this? It's not true. This is a narrative. This is the propaganda, unbelievable propaganda. It's a big lie. It's a big lie. It's a propaganda. Has no basis in fact.
Well, I think we're going to leave that at that. And as I always say, very good when it comes to cutting through all the nonsense that comes from Ethiopia and showing people what exactly is happening in Ethiopia. And, I understand why people want me to have you on when there are significant developments in Ethiopia. And indeed, I'm going to try to have you on when there are significant developments in the future as well. And I'm sure you'll be generous enough to dedicate some of your time for us, Ezekiel. But for today, thank you very much.
I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.